Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And we are always very pleased to be able to come back into this area of the state. We have had and will have a very deep interest in its matters, its problems. I would like to say as a beginning, because I am a board member of the St. Johns River Water Management District, that what I have to say is for myself, and I do not in any way speak for the members of the board, although I can assure you that for 17 months now I have reiterated to each of them in every possible way I could what I am about to say to you, and I would say the same things if they were here. I only must do that because I cannot purport to indicate that the board has taken actions which it has not up to this time. I am particularly grateful to Carl Eichhorn for having published in your bulletin and for distribution to you a historical account of the St. John's project, an accounting of the legislature's establishment of the Water Management District and other matters pertinent to that. That saves me a great deal of time, Carl, and I appreciate your doing it. I would only like to extend in the way of an inventory of some of the conditions that we have encountered in the St. Johns River Basin, an inventory of rather unpleasant conditions, very quickly, and certainly not all of them, but a few of them. The St. Johns River is approximately 300 miles long, reaching actually from Indian River County northward to the sea east of Jacksonville. The obligation of the Water Management District is not simply for the main stem of the river, but for all of the tributaries there too. That is, I have to qualify that somewhat to say if and when the legislature is ever able to make the transfers of the upper basin of the St. Johns and the upper basin of the Ocklawaha River to the St. Johns District, which I sincerely hope they do. There is no way to perform the functions that are necessary in this river without doing that. There are a number of lesser streams, the Econ, the Little Econ, and others which are tributary to the St. Johns River. In addition to that, the Water Management District has responsibility for all of the streams, the little coastal streams like the Tomoka, Spruce Creek, St. Mary's River on the Georgia-Florida line, so that our obligations are not confined to the St. John's main stem itself by any stretch of the imagination. In addition, the responsibility of the Water Management District extends into salt water to the territorial limits of the state, and all of you should know that. That's a thing that is very commonly neglected or omitted from common knowledge. But to get back to an inventory of some of the major problems, I don't need to tell you people in this county that there are agricultural and municipal problems with water, specifically in Brevard County and parts at least of the counties surrounding them. There is a tremendous problem in the upper St. Johns Basin which centers on the fact that a great amount of water which falls in the basin is diverted directly through the coastal ridge to Indian River, which creates problems not only for the St. Johns Basin but for the Indian River as well. Going on downstream, which is upstream, there appears to be conditions of worsening pollution in the central sections of the river, and here I have in mind the area of Seminole, Volusia County, and generally in that area, DeLand and Sanford. In that same area, there is an enormous problem of low flow. Some people are referring to it as a condition of flow stagnation. At times, the St. John's does come to a standstill in the central section, and in fact, because of tidal incursion, salt water moves upstream. With each tidal incursion, it moves further and further upstream. On one occasion, at least within the last 10 years, salt water reached the power plant, which is sitting on the bridge that's on Interstate 4 just west of Sanford, where it crosses the St. Johns River south of DeLand, DeBarry, those little towns, and the power plant operators took salt water into their intake pipes. This can enlarge itself into an enormously critical problem. Low flow in the central section, low if not stopped. In my particular home area, I live in Putnam County, and in the county next to the East St. Johns County, we have large agricultural operations based primarily on production of potatoes and cabbage, although there are other products. There's quite a large flower industry, gladiolus, and I don't know what all that, a number of others, IRAS and so forth. In the last 10 years, beginning about 10 years ago, because of the growth of this agricultural industry, it was necessary for the farm operators to install irrigation systems, deep wells, pumps, and all that kind of thing. Prior to that time, the people who farmed in that area relied totally on artesian flow, and it was not necessary for them to have pumps in order to irrigate their fields. But beginning about 10 years ago, they started doing it, and now within 15 days from the time the irrigation season begins, everybody is pumping. It's the only way that they can get water to the fields. The net effect of this is that within 30 days, the groundwater level in the deep aquifer drops in the order of 10 to 15 feet. When you do that in the limestone aquifer, which is all of the base of Florida, the residual seawater, which lies deep in the aquifer, the Floridan aquifer, then, because the head of fresh water is moved, rises vertically up toward the surface of the freshwater column. This has caused the chloride content of the water pumped on those fields to rise from a level of about 400 or 500 parts per million 10 years ago to 4,000 to 5,000 parts per million today. And translation of this to the interest of the agriculturalist is that he is destroying the base of his operation. No land can take that kind of a salting up indefinitely and not be destroyed from the standpoint of producing crops. It causes a dropping of water in wells, in private residential wells, actually in an area spreading around the circumference of the potato and cabbage operations, and from time to time water drops below the points of the pipe in the central pipe in the well, and so they suck air for a while. At Jacksonville, we all know that there has been for a very long time a worsening condition of pollution in that river. I remember Governor Claude Kirk and his administration saying that repairmen on the bridges over the St. John's at Jacksonville were paid hazardous duty because if they fell in the river, they would be exposed to 15 fatal diseases before they could get them out. The city of Jacksonville is working on this problem. The mayor of Jacksonville and his council have moved very well, and I think very positively. They haven't got the problem solved, but they are on the road to install modern sewage treatment facilities, which Jacksonville has lacked for virtually all of its life. East of Jacksonville, again referring to the deep aquifer, because of the great draft of water in the Jacksonville urban area, the sea is moving in. In the first instance, in the Hastings area, potato area, it's rising from the bottom, but out there it's coming in from the shore. So that wells in the vicinity of Mayport are now producing rather highly saline water, and it's continuing to move in. In other areas, other tributaries, we have enormous water quality problems, pollution problems in the Little Econlockhatchee River, and certainly in the upper Ocklawaha. I doubt that there are many of you who have not heard of the severe water quality problems which we have been experiencing for some time in Lakes Apopka, Griffin, and like 4 or 5 others in the upper Ocklawaha chain. A problem which is widespread throughout the entire basin, and as far as I know all of its tributaries, is the uncontrollable reproduction of hyacinths. We are spending every year in this state more and more and more dollars, and we are winding up with more and more and more acres of hyacinths. We are not treating the cause, we are treating the symptom, and we will never cure the symptom by that approach. In some areas of some of these streams and lakes, in addition to hyacinths, we have tremendous blooms of other exotic, that is imported weeds, notably hydrilla, which is rampant in the Rodman Pool of the Cross Florida Barge Canal, which is a part of the Ocklawaha drainage and is at the present time in the boundaries of the St. Johns River Water Management District. In Volusia County, the county is blessed with a recharge area known as, referred to at least, as the Volusia Recharge Area lying west of the urban area. You probably have heard of the ordinance which that county adopted and is now toying with as to whether retain it or not retain it. They have received all kinds of flack because of an ordinance that they established to protect that recharge area. They have postponed any decision on it. I believe it's for 45 days in the hopes that the St. John's District will move to relieve them of the burden which they brought down on themselves when they adopted this rather restrictive ordinance. This is very important because that entire recharge area is surrounded by salt water, north, south, east, and west. All of these are problems which are difficult to deal with. They will worsen in the future, and the point is that they are problems which must be met. That's a very quick rundown on the array of difficulties that we face. I would like to say that when I left South Florida, I was a member of the Central and Southern Board. I advised the governor that I was leaving the geographic limits, moving out of the geographic limits of that district, and when that happens to you, you disqualify yourself for further membership. And so I advised him of that, and in the same letter told him that I would be very glad to be considered as a member, if he chose, to be a member of the board of the St. John's District if and when it were formed. Well, it was, of course, subsequently formed, and I was fortunately appointed by the governor to serve on that board and was elected by its membership to be their chairman, which I have been for the last 17 months. My term expires June 30th. That's the end of this upcoming month. And so does the term of 5 other persons on that board, and that's a matter that all of you should pay very particular attention to for this simple reason. When that board was assembled 17 months ago, a good majority of the board knew nothing more about water except that it was good to mix with bourbon and that it was wet. So what we have been going through with is an enormous educational program to try to teach these people who get together 1 day a month. 17 months sounds like a long time, but you reduce it to 1 day a month. It's not really very long in educating board members to the difficult questions which they face, the problems that I have recited to you, the way natural systems work, the way that they are violated, the services that they provide to man, the problems of laws within the cities, the counties, the state and the federal government, the agencies involved, and that item alone is enough to take more than the full 17 months for good understanding, believe me. And so I'm very concerned if the governor should choose not to reappoint those 6 people, we begin all over again 18 months ago. I accepted an appointment to that board because I felt that the legislature was absolutely right in its intent to place that entire river under one single management. Thus far, we have failed to accomplish that. It's probably going to be quite some time before we are able to accomplish that. But I thought, since I am a student of ecosystems, including river systems, that if there were ever an opportunity to deal rationally and sensibly with a river, an entire river, and all of the values that it gives to us, certainly the St. John's River Water Management District would have that opportunity. Do you mind if I do this? And all of you gentlemen? I had come at that time very recently from the enormous array of problems with South Florida faces. All of you know what most of those problems are. Many of them are related to water in one way or another and its management or its mismanagement. I know of no one who envies South Florida and its array of problems. I don't know anyone north of South or Central Florida who wants to see those problems repeated elsewhere. They are moving inexorably in that direction. My feeling then, 17 months ago, was very simply that if we ever were being given an opportunity to deal with a vital system on which all kinds of life, including human life, are dependent, it was to deal with the St. John's River. I felt and I feel that it could and it can be a model of river management not only for the state of Florida but for all of the United States and even for others in other countries in the world as to how to look at that. I have not given up on that expectation. But I certainly have to say this to you, that if we're going to move to solutions, we had better begin moving, and so far as I'm concerned, I would be very delighted to see the solutions begin here. Let me say something to you about solving problems. I'm going next week to participate, as Hugh has told you, in a worldwide conference, which is a very heady experience for me, I assure you, in which I have to think of the problems not only of this massive technological nation of ours, but of the underdeveloped countries of the world, which is quite a different proposition. I have never aimed to become involved in attempts at solutions to problems on a worldwide basis. One reason being, I guess, that I don't know any human mind that can encompass that range, that scope, that enormous geographic area. We can, bit by bit and piece by piece, and I think I'm maybe, because of an intense concentration on this program next week, I'm beginning to see some points that maybe I can give to that group and leave with that group. But essentially, when humans solve problems, they don't do it around the world. They do it in one place. It begins in one place. I often think that somewhere on the face of the earth, some surgeon in the past removed a diseased appendix from one human being. It worked. And now what happens? All around the world, surgeons are removing diseased appendices from human beings. I think we are more likely to begin in the direction of solving this inordinate array of problems that we are confronted with today by focusing on a small piece of the earth, and that is the reason I have stayed in Florida, and that is the reason I will not leave Florida. In assessing the future of the St. Johns River, and that's what I'm trying to address myself to, it is necessary for each of us to recognize that neither the river, the basins, its problems, or their solutions stand as an entity within themselves. They were not created, and they will not be solved within the confines of the drainage boundaries of the St. Johns River. First, many of the problems of the river and its basin are identical in a host of ways to problems existing elsewhere. Some of them, as you know, are problems of water shortages, of pollution, of very great damages to fish and wildlife resources, to recreational values. We have a nightmare, I think, that's raising its head of agricultural production problems, of inflation, of energy shortages, of unemployment, and of super rapid growth. They are not confined to the St. Johns Basin. Solutions to those problems will not and cannot be generated solely within this basin. Although participation in the solution of those problems in ways appropriate to the specific circumstances of the basin by people who live in the basin are absolutely essential. I don't think that it's difficult for anyone to believe that we live in an unusual time in history. Every day, all day, we are besieged by an array of almost inconceivable problems, inconceivable in their complexities and inconceivable in their numbers. It is nonetheless very difficult for many of us to believe that we live in a unique time in all of human history. A unique time in all of human history. And especially to know why this is so. I want to go to the blackboard for a few minutes and show you some very simple concepts which I think explain the predicament that we are in. The first thing is that all of us know now that what we must preserve are systems. That must be our number one primary aim in Florida, the nation, and the world. Life support systems. whether it's the whole Earth or a part of the Earth, the Florida Peninsula, the St. John's Basin, the Everglades, what have you. Systems. I have thought for some time that the greatest product of the space program, which of course this community is very much associated with the view of our Earth and outer space, that I think this probably, those photographs, which all of us have seen repeatedly, are the most important product of the whole space program. Because what they did in the beauty that they showed and in the interviews, television appearances, and so forth of the men who went out into space was to make us aware that our Earth was different from the other planets and our bodies in space for one single reason: light. Light. That's what gives it the color. That's what gives it the beauty. You remove all light so that there's not even an algal slime under the rock, and those pictures would have looked like a moon cake. That's what we have to deal with, and I think that was a tremendous contribution of the most tremendous contribution of the space program. System, life support system. The next thing is that we have learned, and we have much more than adequate documentation, that when technological man moves into these systems and he does something to them, many things he does to them, it produces a curve having to do with their efficiency. I call it a curve of efficiency, which takes this shape. And that after a time, he begins to put these systems under stress. They will tell us that with a blast of little symptoms of the difficulties that they're experiencing. Our general tendency is either to ignore them or to treat only the symptoms of non-invasive causes, like spraying hyacinth or providing another expressway in Miami when it really needs to get rid of some people, not another highway. If we continue on this course, we will reach what I call a critical threshold, at which time the system will relieve itself, like a pop-off valve on a hot water heater. The pressure will all be gone, and it'll settle back to something. It takes a lot of thought to think of what that something is for human society, or will be, as we go down this trail. But it will have this characteristic, these characteristics, and that whatever the value of the system were that we were depending on, say a lake, to make it a little more specific for you, those values will decline precipitously, and values which it had that we do not appreciate will rise equally specifically. That's Marshall's formulation for the puzzle of the world algebraic notation. That's all there is to it. I spent 9 weeks, 4 hours a week, with graduate classes at the university, just elaborating on what this means. Believe me, there's a lot in it. But you can take a look at this now at a lake. Here's our ecosystem now, the lake, in which all of the parts are integrated. The lakes of Florida, such as Apopka, were very sterile in their pristine condition because this is a sterile state. All of the surface sands were washed and rewashed in rivers, and we wound up with silicon dioxide and not much more. So that those lakes were relatively inefficient because they were relatively infertile. But they supported black bass and bluegill and emergent vegetation around the shore and a number of reptiles and birds that we all are crazy about. We began to fertilize them, not on purpose, just to shove our waste under the rug, so to speak, and we actually enriched them. And for a time, the fishermen all cried that the fishing is better than it ever has been, and that's correct. It's just like a farmer who plants tomatoes and the first year doesn't fertilize them, the next year he does, and he gets more product. Same thing, same reason. And so the lakes reach an optimum level. But as long as we continue to use them to sweep our waste under the floor, we begin to put them back into a stage of exponentially rising inefficiency. They become over-enriched. They begin to tell us so, loud and clear. Repeated green algal blooms in the first few years. They will be followed by repeated blue-green algal blooms, which is worse, but under species diminishing, the stress is rising. Intermittent fish cans. All of you are familiar with this. Our solution is to get some trucks down there and bulldozers and bury them. Treatment of the symptoms. Increasing the depth
of organic ooze on the bottom, which is nothing but the accumulated rain of the dead husks of the dying algae in the upper part of the water column. There are others, but that's enough to give you an idea. And then when the lake passes over the threshold, the lake is not dead. Those of you who know Lake Apopka know that it is not dead. Lake Erie is not dead, despite all the press and tales you hear about it. They are extremely productive bodies of water. But instead of producing emergent shallow vegetation, which is typical of our Florida lakes, they produce algae. Instead of producing black bass and bluegills, they produce gizzard shad, garfish, and mudfish. This is what happens. Instead of having clear sand bottoms, they have muddy bottoms, which it is no pleasure to see and certainly not to swim in or walk in. And so the values. Turtles are killed, alligators are killed, birds, waterfowl are killed. The values that we prize, the clear water, the clean bottoms, and all that array of wildlife goes down, the gizzard shad, the turbidity, and the mud bottom comes up. Same thing in the Everglades. When we drain the Everglades, and we really overdid it, we began to produce an array of symptoms of stress in that great ecosystem, which are well known to, I guess, to the whole world now. The disappearance of the muck layer, we converted that from a system which was producing muck to a system which was destroying the muck, consuming it. The placement of about 18 species, largely of birds, into the rare and endangered status. An enormous increase in the fires which burn across the Everglades. A general lowering of the availability of water for the human supply, all human needs. An increase in the rate of salt intrusion, the extent of salt intrusion along the shore. There are others, but what are they? Those are nothing but the symptoms of stress in the Everglades that Lake Apopka shows from some stress that man put on the system. Lakes, Everglades, city. How about cities? What are the symptoms of stress in our major urban areas in this state? Fine. All of you who are parents know overloaded schools, parks, jails, courts, streets, unemployment, bonded indebtedness for the municipalities, which is unbelievable and intolerable. Air pollution, water pollution, destruction of the animal species, the aquatic species that inhabit the streams, the lakes, the bays, and so forth in those great urban areas. What happens? It continues. We have a great, I guess, the greatest American city that reached that point and passed it. I wonder sometimes how to avoid it so long, New York City. Now it's still bankrupt. There's no other word for it, that no one can lend it in the money anymore. It was able to make short-term loans, to treat its problems symptomatically, but never to deal with the real issue, which is to say that when you put a demand on any system, a life support system, a city as a life support system, you will in time pass the limits of our capability to finance the needs of that community. And in doing that, and then when the energy thing came along, it worsened the whole situation. Yes, it applies to cities. The urban goalpost of Florida in its pristine state might have supported 20 or 30,000 people. It went along up into the mid-50s, let's say, supporting, what, 1 million people. And we jazzed it up by bringing in fossil energy and fossil energy products from all over the world. And we increased the capability of that area to support people by virtue of this input. And we jazzed it up some more, I guess. It went up to about 3 million or whatever it is now. But the balloon is being pumped. And this is why the people in South Florida are in public. It's very much the same as was done to the deer in the Florida Everglades. We lowered the water level in the Everglades so the deer could expand their range. Consequently, they increased greatly in number. But about the time that they do that increasing, we throw the water back on them. so that the habitat was generated for them suddenly is no longer there, and the population has to take a nosedive. We increase the human carrying capacity of the urban systems in South Florida by this device, which is comparable to lowering the water in the Everglades while the air is carried, and now it's being swept out from under. That's why they're in trouble. That's why they're in double trouble. It is evident that it's precipitous to them because they're here, you see, and when you get near the cliff, each step you take is a hazardous one. This is why government won't make decisions, because it's so dangerous to take a step and so nearly precipitous when you are close to the edge of the cliff. There is another great system which operates on exactly under the exact same phenomenon, same concept, and that is the human system. What I've been talking to you about is precisely the conceptual basis of the practice of modern medicine. In the human body, there are literally dozens of organs and systems which operate to keep that system oscillating around an optimum, not precisely at it, but oscillating around it. In regard to temperature, for instance, if you get too warm, you perspire in order to bring you back to that optimum. If you get too cold, your teeth chatter in order to bring you back to that optimum. Some of the other balance systems of this kind in which the human system is trying to balance itself and maintain good health around an optimum are the balance of blood protein, the balance of blood sugar, and there are literally dozens of others. If you want to read a magnificent book on it, read The Wisdom of the Body, written by Dr. Walter Cannon.